Only in Kentucky can a peaceful Japanese friendship garden share a county with a frontier boarding school scandal that forced the U.S. Senate to step in and elect the vice president. Hi, I'm Michael, and I'm learning a little bit more about Kentucky, one county at a time, all 120 of them. And today, I'm learning about Scott County. As an aside, quick shout out to New Frontier Apparel out of Moorhead for a recent care package, which included this hat, which is probably now my new favorite hat that I own. So thanks, guys. Scott County sits on the edge of the Lexington metro area, spanning the transition between the inner and outer bluegrass regions. In the north, the land is broken into hills, ridges, and ravines, rising to an elevation of over 1,000 feet along the county line near Eagle Creek. To the south, the terrain shifts into a plateau, dropping to 690 feet where North Elkhorn Creek exits the county. Georgetown, the county seat, sits on this lower shelf at an elevation of about 840 feet. The geological feature shaping this county is a foundation of limestone and shale. Water has carved through this stone for millions of years, creating a karst network of sinkholes, channels, and springs. This water system created a divide among settlers, leaving the ridges dry during summer droughts while the valleys had water supplies. I bring that up because today Georgetown stands as one of the largest cities in the region, completely dependent on a single karst spring for its municipal drinking water. Because this water flows rapidly through open limestone channels rather than filtering slowly through sand or clay, surface contamination anywhere in the southern watershed can reach the city taps within hours. Exploration began in June 1774 when an expedition from Virginia led by Colonel John Floyd tracked the water networks to a spring he named Royal Spring. Floyd claimed 1,000 acres surrounding the water as payment for his surveying work, though he never settled in. In 1775, John McClellan arrived at the spring and constructed McClellan Station, an outpost designed to protect settlers, which was abandoned in 1777 following attacks by native forces. Settlement did take root in 1783 when Robert and Jemima Johnson Station, 5 miles west of Royal Spring. They chose a location at Great Crossing, a ford along North Elkhorn Creek. This spot earned its name because bison had carved a trail through the wilderness to cross the water at this coordinate, packing the mud into a highway of sorts. Well, in 1784, a preacher named Elijah Craig arrived at the spring and founded the town of Lebanon. Craig was a dissenter who had been jailed in Virginia for preaching without a license from the Anglican Church. Seeking freedom in Kentucky, he set up a school in 1787 where he accepted payments in cash and pork. In 1789, Craig built a distillery along the Royal Spring branch, using the water to pioneer a sour mash process that links his name to the birth of bourbon whiskey. Following this boom in the city, the legislature changed the name of the town in 1790 to Georgetown to honor George Washington. When Kentucky achieved statehood, the legislature carved Scott County out of Woodford County on June 1, 1792, naming it for General Charles Scott. When Elijah Craig died in 1808, the town lost its industrial engine and fell into a freefall. In 1816, religious leader Barton W. Stone arrived to take over the local academy there. He found a community completely unmoored, writing that Georgetown was notorious for its wickedness and irreligion. In 1825, the county became the site of the Choctaw Academy, a boarding school for Native Americans. The academy was established at Blue Spring Farm on the property of politician Richard Mentor Johnson, who used his connection to the Indian agent to secure a contract from the War Department. Johnson hired a minister named Thomas Henderson to serve as superintendent, instructing him to keep the school on a budget so Johnson could pocket the federal funds. The academy sat on a plantation where Johnson lived openly with his enslaved wife, Julia Chin, and their daughters, Adeline and Imogene, whom Johnson forced to work as maids and cooks for the students. This arrangement created, understandably, some volatility, culminating in incidents where students often forced their way into the house to confront the family. This domestic arrangement triggered a national crisis when Johnson ran for vice president of the U.S. in 1836 on the ticket with Martin Van Buren. Outraged by his private life in Scott County, the Virginia electors boycotted Johnson, preventing him from winning a majority in the Electoral College. And for the only time in American history, the vice presidential election was thrown to the U.S. Senate, which ultimately voted him into office based on his frontier military record rather than his domestic choices. To reduce the need to hire additional teachers, Johnson introduced the Lancastrian Plan at the Academy in 1828. This was an instructional model in which advanced students monitored and taught the elementary grades. Once enrolled, students were stripped of their names and assigned aliases like Thomas McKinney or Zachary Taylor to track their progress. In June of 1833, a cholera epidemic swept through the academy, lasting 3 weeks. The outbreak killed 14 enslaved workers, a white man, and 9 students. The use of aliases created a nightmare for the War Department because it made it difficult for tribal leaders to identify the dead. Chief John Blunt spent months trading letters with officials to find out if his son Billy had died, only to discover the school had confused his identity with another student named Charles Phillips. An investigation by Choctaw leader Peter Pitchlynn in 1840 confirmed complaints of poor clothing, inadequate education, and forced manual labor. This led the Choctaw to pull their funding and remove their students by 1842. During his efforts to expose the academy, Pitchlynn caught the attention of author Charles Dickens. In 1842, Dickens met Pitchlynn on a steamboat and spent hours interviewing the Choctaw leader. Dickens was so impressed by his intellect and education that he published an extensive profile of Pitchlynn in his book American Notes, creating a stark contrast to the forced assimilation policies happening back at the school in Kentucky. The academy closed for good in 1848 when the final 13 Chickasaw students left the property. But long before the academy closed, a group of settlers arrived seeking freedom. In 1786, a colony of Catholic settlers from Maryland arrived and established a mission at White Sulphur Springs. In 1793, they constructed a log cabin known as St. Francis de Sales, which became the second Catholic parish developed in Kentucky. But on December 1st, 1793, it became the first church in the state to hold a formal mass. The church welcomed Father Stephen Baden, the first priest ordained in the U.S. Baden traveled from Pittsburgh to Kentucky on foot and by flatboat, eventually becoming the state's singular riding priest. During his tenure, Baden rode an estimated 100,000 miles on horseback across the wilderness to perform rites for over 300 families. In 1820, the congregation replaced the cabin with a stone church at a cost of $3,600, which members paid out in traded goods. During the antebellum era, the county used enslaved labor to transition into an agricultural empire centered on hemp, tobacco, and livestock. Planters constructed estates, none larger than Ward Hall, a 12,000 square foot mansion built in 1853 for Junius Richard Ward. Ward amassed a fortune running cotton plantations in the Mississippi Delta and built the Kentucky home for $50,000. The home featured 27-foot Corinthian columns and blind windows that appeared normal from the yard, but concealed closets inside. The basement is among the most intact in the country, where enslaved people worked as laborers, artisans, and livestock handlers. Other structures added to the landscape include the 1795 brick Johnson Jacobs House near downtown. Built by pioneer Adam Johnston as a tavern, it provided food, lodging, and stable space for travelers. Decades later, the property was purchased by a blacksmith named William Jacobs, and was later updated by resident Nathan Payne in 1860. The region produced General Basil W. Duke. Duke grew up in the county under the care of his uncle, James K. Duke, whose pasture became a dueling ground where politicians settled scores with pistols. That exact pasture became the grounds for the Kentucky Horse Park in 1978. Following emancipation, freed residents established free towns to escape aggression. Communities like New Zion were founded in 1872 on land deeded to former slaves Primus King and Calvin Hampton along the county line, a hamlet originally known as Briar Hill. Further down the tracks, the community of Stonetown emerged as a haven for families seeking safety and independence. But ongoing coercion and hostility drove families to abandon the state completely, leading to a migration in March of 1878. Daniel and Willina Hickman led a colony of 150 black residents from Georgetown and Stonetown to migrate west, founding the town of Nicodemus, Kansas. In the northern hills, the arrival of the Cincinnati Southern Railroad in 1876 gave birth to the town of Sadieville. The city was incorporated in 1880 and named for Sarah Martha Sadie Emerson Pack Burgess. It's a long name. A local woman and livestock dealer. Sadieville became a market for shipping mules and colts in the U.S. Drivers herded hundreds of young animals down Main Street to the stockyards, kicking up dust clouds that forced advanced men to warn residents that the mules were coming. The town also preserved history through the Sadieville Rosenwald School, built between 1917 and 1920 with funds from the Rosenwald Fund, the school board, and the black community. The school educated rural black students during segregation, during its closure after the 1954 integration ruling, and later served as a fellowship hall for Mount Pleasant Baptist Church. The county's industry remained tied to its rivers, best seen at Weisenberger Mills, which has operated on the banks of South Elkhorn Creek since Augustus Weisenberger purchased the site in 1865. The 1913 mill replaced a stone grist mill and partnered with the University of Kentucky to install a variable speed generator. This upgrade allowed the mill to adjust its generator speed, doubling its power output and feeding excess electricity directly back into the grid. Meanwhile, the town of Stamping Ground took its name from the bison that packed the soil bare at Buffalo Springs, a water source that fueled a distillery complex owned by George T. Stagg. The distillery ceased operations in 1968, and the property was later damaged when a tornado flattened structures during the 1974 super outbreak, a storm that reshaped the town footprint. The same landscape also left a mark on literature. In 1923, author Edith Summers Kelly lived in the hills and penned her novel Weeds. The book abandoned romanticized myths of rural life, instead tracking the struggles of a tomboy named Judith Pippinger, who fights a battle against the roles assigned to women in rural communities. Georgetown College was chartered in 1829 as the first Baptist college west of the mountains. The campus features Recitation Hall, now known as Giddings Hall, which was begun in 1839 under the school's president, Rockwood Giddings. The building features a portico with 6 columns built by a mason and a brick mason named A.L. White, and a legend claims that bourbon is buried underneath each of the 6 columns. The campus boasts a roster of alumni that stretches into a lot of different culture. Robert S. James graduated from the college to become a pastor, later moving west to the Missouri, where he fathered outlaws Frank and Jesse James. Decades later, a student named Billy Ray Cyrus walked these same paths at Georgetown College, attending the college on a baseball scholarship before his music career took him to the top of the charts. For a generation of Bengals fans, Scott County became a destination every summer when the city hosted the Cincinnati Bengals NFL training camp. From 1997 through 2011, thousands of fans packed Toyota Stadium and the practice fields to watch players prepare for the upcoming season, transforming the college town into a fishbowl every July and boosting tourism there. Scott County's charm eventually caught the eye of actor Steve Zahn, who walked away from Los Angeles to buy a farm right there in Scott County. The county's transformation accelerated in 1986 when Toyota Motor Manufacturing Kentucky broke ground on a site that has since grown into the world's largest vehicle plant. The plant opened in 1988 and now employs nearly 10,000 workers, expanding its footprint with a paint facility and hybrid investments. This Japanese connection inspired a bridge right along the water. In 2000, citizens partnered with their sister city of Tahara, Japan, to construct Yuko-en on the Elkhorn, the official Kentucky-Japan Friendship Garden. Landscapers dumped 1,400 truckloads of earth to turn the ground into hills, building gates, a bridge, and a waterfall that mimics the streams of Yakushima Island alongside limestone. But this growth has brought modern friction to the county. Recent economic reports presented to leaders reveal a crisis in which population growth has outpaced construction, creating a housing shortage that squeezes low-income locals. So, that's Scott County. What did I get wrong this time?